You are listening to the Down the Wormhole podcast, exploring the strange and fascinating relationship between science and religion. This week, our hosts are...
Ian Binns, Associate Professor of Elementary Science Education at UNC Charlotte. And if I were to pursue a midlife crisis, the first thing that hit my head is I would get tattoos.
My name is Adam Pryor. I work at Bethany College. If I were to live out one of my midlife crisis fantasies, it would be to send all of my children to boarding school and buy myself a convertible.
Kendra Holt-Moore, PhD candidate at Boston University, and my midlife crisis would either be get an eyebrow piercing or get really involved in local theater and just audition for all the main characters and try to achieve small town fame.
Hi, this is Rachael Jackson, Rabbi at Agudas Israel Congregation, Hendersonville, North Carolina. And if there were a midlife crisis that I would fulfill, I think it would be going off the grid entirely and just becoming a hermit with my cross-stitch stuff and just sitting there and stabbing fabric for hours on end.
So as the question has been to indicate, today we are talking about healthcare and particularly the issues of middle age, which is sort of the least exciting period of healthcare, is what I've decided. Right? No violent birth or death, just the long static period where everything is supposed to be humming along like normal, and yet you feel worse about yourself every day.
This is totally your episode.
Exactly.
I mean, it does feel like I was built for this. But it's interesting, right? Because it's hard to find a lot of information about issues in the middle of life, because ideally things are sort of going along pretty normally. And so there are a couple of things that I found that I thought were really interesting. So most of the material that you find talking about healthy aging, particularly during this period, relates to mental health more than it does physical health. The second thing that I found that I thought was interesting was that folks who tend to be in middle age seem not to go to doctors. They're maybe even worse than their own children, who don't want to go to the doctor, but you make them go. But then when you hit this long middle period, you suddenly stop going as regularly. So I have another confessional question for you all. I'm just curious when the last time you went to a doctor was.
I went to my GP in December.
Reckon my stats here.
Yeah, I went 10 days ago. Sorry, Adam.
You guys are not a representative sample in any way, shape, or form.
Not at all, because the moment you told us before we started recording that that's what the data tells us, I knew immediately I'm throwing that out.
Yeah.
Because I've always been if I got something wrong, I call the doctor.
Do you really?
I'm the opposite of that, Ian. I'm the... I only go...
Now
I need to establish a baseline kind of person. So that's why I went, because I was turning 40 this year, and because health insurance is stupid, it worked out better that I went in December of last year rather than wait until I officially turned 40 this March. So I went last December so I could get a baseline of, okay, this is what I am at 40. Plus, it was a pandemic year, so I was super stressed. So what did I look like in a super stressed 40-year-old is kind of why I went. I won't be going this year.
I don't have a GP, but I have been a graduate student with my health insurance through Boston University. So I would just go to student health services, and then they might tell me to go somewhere else. So I guess that kind of counts as a GP.
I think that counts.
Health services.
But you're also technically, just throwing that one out there, you're not also technically middle-aged. So.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct, right?
I just thought I'd throw in my experience there. I do try to avoid the doctor until something urgent happens.
See, so...
And I have been in the last year. Okay.
I have had some unusual medical things happened to me over the last 10 to 15 years that that's another reason why I'm like, you know what? Something's going on. And I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure about this. Now what I do is I'll send them a message to the online system and say, hey, this is happening. Thoughts? And if they want me to come in, I come in. Just because, but the running joke when I had that weird infection in my hand that hospitalized me for 2 days and led to 2 surgeries, and would have killed me if I had not gone in. All the guys I work out with said, hey man, it's really good you're a wuss, because if it happened to any of us, we would have been dead. And I was like, exactly. When I kept explaining, you have no idea how much my finger hurt. And they just were like, dude, just no, it's your finger. It does not matter. So, yeah. Because I went in is the reason why I didn't have to have anything amputated or end up dying. So,
So worth the check.
Huh?
So it was worth the check.
Absolutely. And I've had kidney stones several times. So yeah, when stuff happens, I'm just like, yeah, that's what they're there for. I'm under that, I think, mindset because growing up on a military facility in Germany, and even though my parents were divorced, I was still under my dad's medical insurance as a retiree. And so there was never a cost associated with going. My insurance I was fully covered with everything. And when you had something wrong, you just went. And I remember the first time I had to go to the doctor when I was in college, and they asked me about the copay. And I just kind of looked at them like, what are you talking about? And it was actually, I didn't even know where to go at first because there was no urgent care for the most part. It was if you had something wrong, on the military facilities, at least at the time, it was more of like, here's the ER, here's this kind of stuff. And that's where you went. And I remember kind of suggesting that to someone, and they're just like, no, you don't go to the ER for that. You go to urgent care. And I didn't know what it was. So yeah, it was a big, wake up call. And as Rachael said, insurance is ridiculous.
Yeah, I feel like the insurance piece is the largest factor of healthcare in middle age.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know about you,
everywhere.
But everywhere, but in particular in middle age, because I feel like you're kind of healthy enough to sort of roll along if you so choose, but also you start to get aware that probably somebody should take a look under the hood and make sure everything's okay. It's like when your car hits 100,000 miles, right? There are just some things you probably should do. And you also go, I really don't want to, because I know how much this will cost. Maybe not everybody feels that way. I certainly feel that way every time my wife looks at me and says, you should go to the doctor. And I say, no, because I'm just too cheap.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right that it's partly our system. So it'd be interesting to see, because you were our anecdotal evidence or our anecdotal stories kind of disproved your scholarship article that you were saying that people of this general age don't go. So I'm wondering if it is a health insurance thing, what about countries that have universal health care, if they experience the same sort of dip in activity at this particular age range?
Yeah, importantly, they don't. This is a distinctly American
So you know that
phenomenon.
answer. Great.
Yes, the World Health Organization has looked at that significantly, right, in terms of talking about what happens when you provide universal access to healthcare.
Right.
And I think it's interesting, right, because in some ways, all three of us, I'm going to exclude you, Kendra, because you're not middle-aged yet, but the three of us who are middle-aged.
I don't want to be associated with you people.
That's right.
Hey, now.
Don't worry, you're going to feel good about talking about houses soon.
Yeah.
No, there's this element that I do kind of wonder, are we not necessarily good representative samples across the board? One, because of education, but two, because of access to probably, I would assume, reasonable health insurance, even if not great health insurance.
If reasonable means that it costs the same as my mortgage, then yes. Yes, I have access to reasonable health insurance.
We realized, and this was interesting to me, and this is not saying anything bad about where I used to work, but the health coverage in Louisiana was better than it is here in North Carolina. Now, the services, I'm not worried about anything. But when it came to the insurance part, like the premiums that we had to pay every month were lower than, for me and Ann on it than it would have been for here, Ann and I. But then they had a really interesting system there. And it was called LSU First. And it was like a 3-tiered system. And the first tier was LSU First. And if a provider or hospital was part of the LSU First, you paid nothing. Like that was part of their system. There was no copay, nothing. It was amazing. And then you had then the next tier is that they were in network, and then you had your deductible, right? And your copay. And then you had out of network deductible copay, which was obviously a whole lot more. But it was just, I remember seeing that when we got down there, and I was just like, whoa, that's amazing. So even when the twins were born, the hospital we did it in was one that was under the LSU First system. So it was considerably cheaper than it would have been if we'd gone to the other hospital, which I find fascinating. But I think one of the things that really helped me when we talk about middle-aged stuff and insurance and all those things, that when I did have that issue, the infection in my finger, they weren't sure what was going on. And we were sitting in the the hand surgeon's office, and they were trying to look at it like, we don't know what this is, but we know we have to do an emergent surgery tonight. And this was at 3:00 in the afternoon telling us this. I do remember Ann then having to call the hospitals to make sure they took my medical insurance. Now I'm on the state health plan, so it ended up not being a problem. But that I do recall also too, either the PA or the doctor or somebody suggesting to Ann, make sure the hospital that we're going to takes your insurance, right? And I was always shocked. I'm still shocked by that. That's just unbelievable, right? And by the second surgery, which was in April of that year, I had reached my out-of-pocket maximum. So I paid nothing the rest of the year when I would go to the doctor, even for PT because of the hand. In fact, even the physician's assistant at the time was like, well, we probably want to get you an occupational therapy. I'm not sure what your insurance looks like. And I said, well, I've met the out-of-pocket maximum. He's like, oh, well, we're just going to write you for a whole bunch of them then. But it was just that mindset of, that's what's so wrong with our system. So you'll get there, Kendra. You'll get there.
I've got some stories to share already about healthcare. My husband almost went deaf a couple of years ago, and so the doctor's bills of trying to get that all sorted out, it's pretty insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I wanted to tackle one of your other points there, Adam. You were saying that, why not? Right? Is it that we're just kind of status quo? And that at this particular point in life, people focus on mental health as opposed to strictly physical health, although the two are often quite related. So that, but the one of the other pieces that I was really thinking about is also at this point of life, and let's clarify. So I just asked 2.5 questions. So let me ask a third actual question and start there. How are we defining middle life?
How do you want to define middle life or middle age?
Yeah, I think that's a crucial question.
We were talking a little bit before things started, right? That it keeps getting pushed older. I'm going to blame the baby boomers because I blame them for everything, and I'm assuming that they just don't want to be old, so they want middle age to go further and further and further, right? Now middle age is to 65. And I'm like,
I just saw that.
No, you're old. You're not middle-aged anymore. You're past middle-aged. I like to use 40. That's the number that I think of. And plus or minus 40, right? But there's something about that, statistically I am closer to death than I am closer to birth, right? And that impending move. that I go, that's to me where the middle life piece hits, which I know is not necessarily a popular answer, and there are different ways to do it, but it feels very straightforward to me.
It makes sense to me. Like, I wouldn't say that like 65 should be the new like middle age mark, but 40 does feel youngish to me. Like, again, I'm speaking as the non-middle aged person in the virtual room, but I think that like technological advancements, people are living longer and will continue to live longer than we had previously. And so it makes sense to me to have middle age scoot a little bit further back than the 40 mark, because I just like a lot of the older people I know who are like grandparents or great grandparents are, I know a lot of people who live well into their 90s, and not saying that that's like the norm for everyone, but it's becoming more the norm. And so I would scooch it back.
It could be that I'm still fully anticipating to die by 80.
Yeah.
Possibly
just
75.
Adam's middle age.
Right.
Is
No.
40.
But so when I was looking, and it depends where you look. When does it start? I've seen the start of middle age be 35, 40, or 45, and the end of middle age be either 60 or 65. I haven't seen middle age end later than 65. The average life expectancy for the United States for men is 80, and for women 84. So I think you're not wrong, Adam, to say that you don't expect to live past 80. That's the average life expectancy of men. Your personal genetics, your family genetics, your lifestyle, all of that, of course, has an issue, but 40 is straight up, like you've literally lived half your life, right? Like from a mathematical standpoint, none of us actually know when we're going to die, but given statistics, half is done, right? And I think, and then from a female standpoint, right, our physiology, right, if we're only seen of as birthing machines, then the question might be, when does half of your birthing abilities end, right? So if we look at what menstruation starts and say 13, rounding small, right, 13, and when does it end? 50, 55, right? Depending. So if we say 55, so it's 20 years, or 40 years, half of that is 35, right? So from a female biological standpoint, 35 would be the start of middle-aged. Half of your reproductive life is over. So in that way, and that's a medical place. So I think 35 is also not an error. When we look at jobs, people aren't necessarily retiring at 60 or 62 or even 65, right? Some people are working until 70, 75. So to say, well, how long is my work history? So if my work history is 50 years and I start when I'm 22, middle age isn't going to start until I'm 45. Right. So I think there's value in understanding when we're talking these ages that there's a lot of different lenses that we can use. And from a psychological and an emotional standpoint, I see middle-aged also, and not necessarily in this generation because people are living so much longer, really starting to kick in. And the end of middle age, where middle age ends, is when you're next, when the generation before you has died, when, if we're looking at the natural order of things and saying, okay, my parents, my aunts and uncles, all of them, they've died. I'm next. And to me, that's one of those places that indicates the end of middle age. So that's how, from an emotional standpoint, which is also why should I go to the doctor? I don't want them to find things. I don't want that reality.
So it reminds you you're not or that you are mortal.
Right. I mean, teenagers and adolescents, that's a better term, adolescents go through an invincible stage. I think in middle age, we go through an immortal stage. And I know I can get hurt, but I'm going to live forever. You know?
A reckoning with mortality.
Yes. Yeah. And it's hard.
Yeah, it does kind of suck. I don't think there's any other way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I started looking up like signs that you have reached middle age or what
Now,
people think.
And note when those were written. So if you're looking
Yes.
up especially, like Huffington Post things, make sure when they were written.
Yeah, that one's funny. The Huffington Post one that was updated in 2017. There's some pretty funny ones on here.
Are you going to share? Or are you just going to leave it like that?
No, hold on. Hair starts appearing everywhere. On your nose, face, ears.
Hair.
Reading on your
Yep.
reading on your phone becomes difficult because the font is suddenly too tiny and blurry. The shed or basement becomes your favorite place. You begin thinking
that one dug a little too close at home.
That's why I read that one.
Oh.
You begin thinking policemen, teachers, and doctors look really young. Yeah. You are obsessed with your health. You begin looking over the top of your glasses. You start enjoying naps more than ever.
No, naps are a forever thing.
Oh, I love
Except
those
for
things.
as punishment for children, right? Because they think it's a punishment, but
Yeah, they
I
don't know
love
what they're
naps
missing.
forever.
You find yourself saying what and huh all the time. You find it a lot harder to lose weight, a whole lot harder. You don't know any of the songs playing on the radio. Gardening becomes an obsession. You develop little leaks.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it is. You
could-
groan
that
every
could have
time you
happened to
bend
Ed.
over.
That could have happened to anybody or at different times, depending on what their birthing was like.
Yeah.
Saying.
Anyway, those are some.
Those are some.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about defining middle age by how leaky you are. But I kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Can't wait. Some of those already apply, though, actually.
Yeah. See, I told you you're on your way.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's better
So
than the alternative.
wait, what's the alternative?
Death.
Death.
I like that no one said like youth forever. Like nobody went with
awful.
like the transhumanist answer there. That's good. That's good.
We covered that. That's
right.
not what we want.
That's not what we want. We want death.
Which, dear listener, tune in next time when Kendra takes us on a conversation about death.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be great.
In preparation for that conversation about death, as we reach this sort of like middle-aged piece, right? We talked a little bit about this idea that like mental health becomes a big piece of how people think about it, and there's this in a lot of research, there's this sort of description of a longing for youth, right? A sort of almost like a nostalgia for things that you used to be able to do, but now perhaps that was no longer a good idea, is my way of describing it. So like I ran into this the other day when I was throwing Linus up in the air, and I went,
Did you
it was a poor decision in relationship to when I did this with Henry, and I didn't even like think about it. And Henry was a heavier child, and that made me more depressed about what that experience was like.
But just to clarify, the two of them are what, 9 years apart?
9 years apart.
Yeah.
Were you
you're 9 years
stronger
old.
then?
I'm immortal.
More physically fit?
Yeah.
But were you doing more physical things then, like physically fit than you are now?
I feel as though I feel like I can say that for like a 37-year-old, I am like relatively fit. I went out and biked 105 miles last weekend. Like I feel I feel relatively fit. I've been cycling a lot. Like, I don't feel undue in that regard, but also like not like when I was in my, mid-20s and could swing my child around without abandon no matter what.
Well, the only reason why I'm asking is because, like, for example, because of, when I joined F3 and started doing boot camp style workouts, when I was a kid and stuff and a runner, I never had upper body strength. So I could never do pull-ups or anything like that. Now I can't go out right now and knock many pull-ups out because I'm not, because of the pandemic and stuff, I've not really worked on physical strength like I had before. But when I was training for those Spartan races, yeah, I could knock out pull-ups, and that was 39, 40, 41. So I was definitely more physically stronger then than I was maybe when the kids were born. So that's why I was asking, like, is it just because of middle age? Now, there are aches and pains that I have now that didn't, especially back pains. Back and neck pains that you're just like, oh, that was one of the ones I did not read off.
Back and neck pain?
Like back and neck pains. And then it also made me think too, one of the things I saw on another list was purchasing, decor for your house. That if you're more excited about that than other things, toys or whatever, that's obviously a big difference.
Like going out on Saturday night, a fun date on Saturday night is like Home Depot, Target, and Sam's Club.
Yeah.
Free samples.
Or then even like the type of
good.
bed.
The free samples are back. I just want to.
Are they back for you? They're not back for us.
They are coming back for us, and it is going to drive my grocery bill down.
Yeah,
because I'm going to eat me some free samples.
That's a middle-aged thing, I would say, because you're sitting there. Can you say what you said it? It's going to drive my grocery bill down.
That's right. That's what I'm worried about.
I don't know if that's a middle-aged thing.
I think that's
or is that just a cheap thing?
That's a cheap thing.
That's a cheap Adam? Okay. You're right. That's just cheap Adam.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. In typical Rachael fashion, can we talk about the positives, though?
There are positives?
There are positives.
Are you sure? Because I bet
Yes.
I can flip all your positives into negatives.
Okay.
You were just saying you're not as strong as you were before.
I need my popcorn. Well played on that one, Rachael.
Thank you.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Remember, she lifts weights.
Flip it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think really happens to people in this category of middle age, however a person chooses to identify when it starts and when it ends, is a really knowing oneself. And this is where I think the midlife crisis concept comes in, where a person finally realizes that they are mortal and that time is the most precious thing that we have. And because of that, we don't want to waste it. And so there's a reevaluation of life, a reevaluation of priorities, a reevaluation of self. And that transformation, that metamorphosis, I think is absolutely beautiful. And there's a sort of understanding of not really caring as much what others think at a particular age. That turns into curmudgeonly old men usually, but it develops in a nice way early. So that for me is one of the biggest positives that I see in this category of middle age.
Okay, but I'm gonna just turn that on its head a little bit, right? Because that might go really poorly.
In what way?
As well, right? So I think part of what goes on with that midlife crisis is exactly this sort of like self-awareness that you're describing, right? But what happens when you're aware that the self you've become is drastically not what you want to be?
Then you change.
Or you buy a convertible.
Or get tattoos.
Or you find really poor coping mechanisms.
Correct.
Like
But
eating too much
that's
candy.
at every stage. Well, yes. I mean, hence the poor weight loss issues.
Yeah.
Right, then
But I mean, I
that's
think
sort of an unhealthy coping mechanism that our society has made a joke of.
But I think part of this is that like the discovery of self is not inherently positive, right? It's a sort of neutral item, I think.
Oh. Really?
Wouldn't that be based on perspective, though? The discovery of like,
that.
yeah,
Wait, say it again?
I'm with you, Rachel. Yeah, say that again, Adam.
The discovery of self is not inherently positive. I think it's neutral.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
Say more, Kendra.
I mean, it's such a personal like process, but I think what I hear when Adam says that is that people over the course of their lives, and not just in middle age, although sure it can like look a particular way because that's when we talk about things like midlife crisis and all of that, but people have different like practices and hobbies, and life circumstances change you, and you just become more self-aware over the course of your life. Or not everyone does become more self-aware, actually, and it just, yeah, I think what Adam just said is that like you can wake up one day and realize that you're not who you hoped you would be, and might also find it really hard to change into who you hope to be. And I don't know, like there's just a million factors that play into like what constitutes the self. And I guess that's maybe the bigger, more daunting question is like, what are we discovering when we discover the self? But I just think that, like to be satisfied with the self that you discover probably has a lot to do with things like a healthy support system and financial stability and, like meaning making processes that are, accessible to you. And that, I mean, those things aren't like what we typically consider to be an inherent part of the self, but they, I think, make life a lot easier for us to become our best selves. And so, yeah, it feels like a really, like life is complicated, discovering who we are or creating ourselves the way that we want to be is just, yeah, it's a real mixed bag for people. And so it feels really intuitive to me that it is a neutral process, because it can look very good for some people and very bad for others. And it's wrapped up in all of these like social factors too. And some people just don't have a lot of control over those things. And what they do have control over, well, yeah, I guess that still brings us to a conversation about like, it's not about like what you can't control, but it's about like the attitude you have towards the things you can't control, like little quotes like that about, who you are or who you're not. And yeah, so anyway, I just find that a really intuitive way to talk about like self-discovery. What does that not feel? I'm curious about what you guys are thinking, Rachael and Ian.
Go ahead, Ian.
I think the way you said it was a lot nicer. I'm just going to say it. So it
you
makes
feel better
it
about
like,
the way Kendra said it?
I do. Because I feel like it still gets the way I was thinking of it as a perspective thing, right? It's how you approach it. And I think that shifts depending on what stage of life you're in, and also can just depend on the day, or the moment that you're experiencing something. And so I guess over time it could average out as neutral if you look at it that way. But go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, so one of the things that, this helped a lot with like all of the mindfulness meditation I've done is to really focus on, which I just hit 1 year daily last Friday. I was very excited with that 10% happier group. But is that, we're still a work in progress, obviously, but recognizing what I can and cannot control, and to learning how to let that go is tough, right? So I think by the fact that I'm getting better at that than I used to be, that would make it, I think, things more positive because I'm recognizing what I have control over. But if I'm in a foul mood or struggling on that day, it doesn't matter. It will be a negative, perspective. So,
yeah. And I just wanted to add that, like, what I just said, I could see how maybe it sounds like a little bit deterministic of like, oh, what's around you makes you who you are. And I do think that's true to an extent, but also like what you're saying, Ian, the personal practices we have to try to, like create ourselves, or however you want to phrase that. It's a matter of practice and like determination to some extent that, you might not feel the same every day, and that's okay. I don't think that really like changes your like fundamental being. It's just that like I think humans, we have practices for ourselves. We participate in rituals. We have community and support systems because those things do create a boundedness around who we perceive ourselves to be. And we each have many different roles in our families and friends and communities, and that those are all ways that we do like derive a sense of who we are. And some of that's like aspirational, like if you strip that all away, like how would that make you different than who you are in your role as like teacher, pastor, mother, all of these things. So it's just like it's a really difficult question, I think, to answer without thinking about the things we do to practice being ourselves in the forms of, practices like meditation or attending that like a Bible study group every Sunday, or showing up to class to teach every week, things like that. So I just wanted to add that. Rachael has a very quizzical look on her face.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Total parenthetical tangential aside, I think everyone needs to go through active listening and assertive speaking training. So I hear what you're saying. I think I'm coming at it from a very different place. From a place of, I think, Adam, you said status quo, right? That's one of the characteristics of this time of life is status quo. And when I compare that to other phases of life, say, if we look at right post middle age, what happens after middle age? What happens? How are we calling that? Old, elderly, right? It depends, and then there's medical terminology of elderly or older or frail, all of those different fragile, right? These are all medical terms that can be used in those ways. But if we say elderly, right, or old, right? You have middle age, and then you go to old, and you go to elderly. Old and elderly are, in our society, because that's the one that we can really speak to, are categorized often by the decline of the body and the reevaluation of the self outside of a profession. Whether that profession was raising children or having a career or whatever it was, right? That there's a shift in our culture of, oh, now you're retired. And that's a very big shift in our human doing, our productivity, our society is very surrounded around that. So I think older and elderly are really looking at redefining the self outside of a profession. And in terms of the body, right? The body itself starts to really decline in those points. Youth, adolescence, is categorized and, for me, looked at as finding yourself within society, like pushing the boundaries. Where is authority? How do I fit in? How do I fit there? Like I'm knowing mostly who I am, but it's an age of exploration. This status quo is I've established what my career is, more or less. I've established more or less at least a partnership or not a partnership, a child, like rearing children or not rearing children, that these things are not necessarily fully brand new at this point, right? Most people don't say at 50, now I want children when I didn't want them for the last 30 years. It could be oh, shucks, now we have another, right there. I mean, it's not saying that it doesn't happen, but that it rarely at that stage of life is it yes, this is what I want, and I've never given it any thought, right? That it's a status quo, which allows us to then, in a slow, methodical, or not even methodical, but in a status quo sort of way to say, is this who I am? And I think that, and I will very much say, and I really appreciate you pointing out, Kendra, that this is coming from a point of privilege, right? That this is most definitely coming from a place of privilege that I didn't earn. Some of it I did, most of it I didn't. And that there are people who don't have the privilege to have that conversation of self, which is one of the markers of modernity as opposed to pre-modern era, right? They didn't have this luxury. Work for 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. So having said all of that, I come from a place of this is our time to just sort of slow down and figure out not what we're trying to reclaim, which is what I think you were trying to look at, Adam, but how to re-hone who we are. And even if it's a 180 from who we are, I can now confidently say at 40, I am an introvert. I am not shy, but I'm definitely an introvert. I am a low energy person. I am a particular food eater, not picky, but I like what I like. I'm not going to change that a whole lot. And it's okay that I like blue box mac and cheese, and I'm not going to apologize for that. And I'm not going to feel bad about it. I'm not going to feel bad about who I am or my choices and feel like someone's judging me. And I think that's the recognition of self that has nothing to do with my role as a clergy person, as a spouse, as a parent. It's who am I? What do I like to do? What are the things that make me happy? Not my mood. And if you'll allow me the ability to make one more analogy, one of the things I hear you saying, Ian, is really like weather. Today's weather. How do I feel today? Right? And that's weather. Right? Today, it was 105 degrees in Billings, Montana yesterday. That is absurd. And it snowed in Texas. And that is absurd. Right? The weather is the daily changes. But the climate, that's what we're looking at now. And I'm saying at this point in our life, this is when we can recognize the climate. Is it changing? Can we change it? Do we want it to change? If so, how? Right? Cooler Texas sounds great. Hotter Montana, not great. Warmer oceans, bad idea. Poor little sharks. Heard a whole story on sharks and being in mermaid purses and stuff like that, and how warm oceans are making them die. Right, like that would be the negative. But I think inherently it is good. I think inherently, and that's where I'm saying it's not inherently neutral. I think it's inherently good to look at oneself in the mirror and say, this is who I am, and I'm good with that. So that for me is the positive, because we're not focusing on developing the career, rearing the young, worrying about our bodies. Again, speaking from a place of privilege.
I'm okay with that if you're good with it. It's the person who looks at it and says, I'm not, and there's no mechanism to change, that I look at and go, that's a different sort of notion of what self-discovery is.
Why is there not a mechanism to change? That's what I don't understand.
Privilege.
Can you say more?
Yeah, I want
feel
you to
like I'm
expand
being
on that
dense.
one, buddy.
No, so let me do it this way. I'm Joe Trucker, and Joe Trucker has woken up at 45 and gone, I've spent 20 years of my life driving truck, and I'm not sure that I believe that I've actually done anything good in the world, and I would like to do something good in the world. And I have no savings by which to change the structure of the day-to-day grind that I find myself in. Mm-hmm. That is not a moment of self-discovery that I would say is inherently good.
Disagree.
But I think that's because you assume the structure of knowing the truth is good.
I do assume that.
And I do not.
But you are also, Adam, I feel like with the example you just gave, you're still not fully in that person's perspective.
No.
The example
No.
you gave, you've not lived that perspective, so you do not know. So that's the to me, it sounds like, and that's why I want to push back a little bit on that. Like, I see your point, Adam, with that example. Based on my perspective, I would potentially see it that the same way. But based on a person who's lived that entire life in their perspective, I can't say how I would see it. Because I've not lived that life.
If you can't say how you would see it, I also don't think you can say self-discovery is inherently good.
But I see the problem that I have with your analogy is that you're basing that on a person's profession. That person could then say, yep, I am a trucker and I feel like I haven't done anything good in the world. Now let me go be a trucker for a company that I feel does good in the world. Or now let me take this time that I have because I might truck 60 hours a week, but I have 2 hours that I can give. And I'd rather do that because this is a lack that I feel and I can do something about that. So the profession might not change. The situation of having savings might not change, but that self-discovery can be a very positive change.
But I think can and is are two different things. It can be a positive change.
There is no try, only do.
But will it be is also is part of what I would press back on there. Yeah. And why I would call it neutral.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to also reflect that I think that Adam's hypothetical, it's not that the hypothetical is always the case that, like, Joe Trucker is going to reflect on himself as, you know, being like in a negative or positive position. It's just that both of those possibilities can happen. And because of the potential for that to go either way, that's where the neutrality lies.
I mean, I work in higher ed. I'm generally in favor of self-discovery as like something that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're swaying me towards neutrality. I can see that. But you're right, Adam. I do believe that, you know, the more truth we know, that is inherently good. That I do. That is more my perspective, my worldview. I do not believe of ignorance is bliss kind of.
I agree with that worldview. Of course, there are things that we can learn that is true that we may not like.
Yeah.
But I think when you put it all together, I still feel like, yeah, it's better to know. When you put it all together. Again, Adam, you could come up with an example right now. Yeah, you could come up with an example right now that would be like, oh, I'm betting he wouldn't like this. And then you would tell me and I'd get mad. But then after that, I'll be all right.
I'll leave that alone. I'll let you stew in your optimism for a while. That's fine.
Thank you.
Stew in optimism. That means it's just going to concentrate more and I'm going to be even more optimistic then.
That does seem to be how optimism works for people.
It is. I'm sorry you don't understand it. Yeah, that was Okay, well, optimistic me. Because that's who I am, and I'm not going to apologize for it.
That's okay.
Is there anything else good?
I don't know. You were the one who said you could come up with good things about middle age.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just here to turn them over and make them bad.
Yeah.
So
think the take no crap attitude is a good thing.
All right.
I wouldn't say that necessarily comes with it. Middle-age, though.
And also, it could turn you potentially, like, just to, I feel like I'm really with Adam in this episode.
I think so.
The take no crap attitude is something that I also am, like, starting to feel the older I get. I was actually just talking about this with my sister who is in her mid-20s, and how we, like, are definitely starting to care a lot less about what other people say the older we get, and how that can be a great thing. But it can also make you a Karen. Just put that out there. Well, so, you know, good and bad. I say this for myself too, because I don't want to be a Karen, but sometimes it's hard not to be.
I mean, I think
Let
what
me
starts
speak to the manager.
I think what starts to, like, put itself out there, right, are these, there's a mixed bag of what this process of reaching middle age, both in terms of, like, bodily health, mental health, the process of self-evaluation, like, it can take us in different directions, much like other stages of life, right? So, like, even if we talk about middle age as this status quo, right, between, because I liked your, like, Rachael, like, the, like, curve up and the curve down, right? The, like, there's development and growth, and this is exciting, but also, like, I would never, ever want to be a teenager again. Middle age feels much better than being a teenager. I'm watching my child reach into teenagedom and going, I fucking hate you. Go back to being a child or skip right into being 20. But no, nobody likes you right now. I say that to the cat also, but that's different. So, like, there's that element, right? And then I think you can say the same thing on the other side, right? Like, of that, like, I like your distinction between old and elderly, right? Like, there's this element of, I remember speaking with a very good scholar at a conference, and she sort of halfway joked about, I just can't think as fast as I used to. And sort of stopped and paused and then said, no, but I really mean it. Like, this body that I am now is not who I am, right? There's this element of, like, being betrayed by one's physical sensations, which in middle age, I feel like hasn't happened yet. Like, you can be slightly dissatisfied, or there's hair where there wasn't hair before.
There might be a groan.
There's a groan from lifting things up and throwing children around, but like, in general, there's not that sense of, like, bodily betrayal that can come later. But I think there is this element, right? And this is what I think is curious about the whole middle age conversation, where it intersects with health, is this element of, like, an awareness of that status of old and elder, of that eventual bodily betrayal suddenly being around the corner, which can feel impending in a positive or negative way. I mean, the way I phrased it does not make it sound great, but I understand it could be phrased positively.
That comes back to the mortality conversation we were having earlier.
Yeah, right. I feel like middle age is this, like, element of, like, mortality contemplation, and depending on how positive or negative you are, right, like, waiting for the other shoe to drop, of being old and elderly, or of having old and elderly cut short, right? So my thinking about this has, like, changed since I said that I would start to do it, right? Because we had this local pastor who died very suddenly. A truck came across the highway, hit him.
Ooh.
So heartbreaking.
He and his 10-year-old daughter died almost instantly. 13-year-old survived, which is miraculously weird.
How long ago did that happen?
A week, 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So it's this, right? And I'm a fairly well-educated, I did all the pastoral training stuff. I can identify when I'm parallel processing. And yet it doesn't stop that process of parallel processing, right? Like, it continues to occur. And, my wife and I macabrely joked, while also sort of doing the process of grieving that is part of that, to say, she halfway joked that when I said, like, I'm going out and riding 100 miles, like, also she's like, and then you'll never come back. That's what I think about every time you walk out the door with your bicycle and you'll get run over, or you're going to flip over the handlebars and it's not fun, right? In the same way that, like, there's this, like, element that creeps in that, like, every time I send my pre-adolescent teen, who I hope will soon be 20, out on his bicycle to, like, ride to school, I'm like, someone is going to run you over and you'll just be dead. And I feel like that is a hallmark of middle age, that there is this, like, awareness that creeps into the way in which you treat all of these other health-related concerns.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to share something sort of personal there, I've always been with people who are night owls. And so my husband now, like, stays out until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes even later. That's just his personality, and it's fine for us, but it's fine for our relationship. But I, as a person, and emotionally go, oh my God, he's not coming home. Oh my God, he said he'd be home at 2 and it's 2:30. And what is going on? And just last night, like, I'm asleep and it's almost 2 o'clock. It's like 1:45 in the morning, and I see this bright light in my eyes. I'm like, what is going on? He's like, I need you to get up. The car's in a ditch. And my heart just, like, skipped a beat. I was just like, but you're in the house, so you're okay. Like, okay, so the car's in a ditch. Like, that was one of my that was a big fear. And yeah, I'm like trying to figure.
But he's okay.
But he's right. But he was the one that shined the flashlight in my face. He's like, you need to wake up. But confronting it in those ways, saying, this is exactly my fear, and so every time you leave the house, this is what I feel like.
Well, and I think it's that element too, that it's like, it's not just your own mortality that's part of this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's this recognition of literally everyone else's mortality and how that sort of works for you, right? Like,
everyone's going to die.
Right? Like, every time Rachel's like, every time you walk out the door with your bicycle, I'm afraid you're going to die. I'm like, well, every time you gave birth, I was pretty sure that I was going to be parenting by myself. So, live with it. Yeah. Also, like, but it is this sort of shared
But you only did that 3 times. You do this every week. Just throw that one out there.
I think my level of intense fear was justified, because that's a horrible process, birthing. I mean, it's beautiful, but also, like,
terrifying.
Holy smokes.
On that, so while we were going through the classes, when Anne was pregnant with the twins, and there were classes specifically for multiples, right? And so they were talking about, it'll have to be a C-section. Sometimes it could be emergency C-sections, and sometimes there could be complications. And so they were trying to tell the dads that, there's a chance that if you're in a surgery and there's a complication, they may have to whisk you out of the room, but everything's going to be okay. That's what they were telling us. And I just raised my hand and said, yeah, that doesn't work for me. And they just said, well, what do you mean it doesn't work for you? I said, so you're telling me that there could be a potential that for like an hour, I would have no idea what's going on with my wife, who just gave birth to these 2 babies. And you want me to be like, oh, cool. And I kept pushing back. And finally, but Anne helped me change the perspective, saying that, well, honey, if that did happen, it would help me knowing that you are with our children, making sure they're okay. Right. And so the perspective had to shift for me. But I see your point on that one, Adam. I mean, it was like, you can't just say that and then be like, but it's all good. You're fine. And it made, while waiting for them to give her the epidural, because it was a C-section. And so I had to wait outside of the operating room for them to do that process. And I would see, because we had 2 teams of of nurses and stuff for the babies, and then of course the doctor and the nurses for Anne, that they're all walking in and out, and I'm just sitting there staring at them going in and out. And that was tough. That was an exciting moment, but for those few moments, it was terrifying.
I mean, I think the intensity of those sorts of moments that you have, like, earlier in your life are now spread at a low level across every day. Zach is never going to let me lead an episode ever again.
No. I can't wait till we start with like the beginning of where we do stories and you get to tell us a story and then go, okay, everyone, what do you guys think?
I have no idea how to pull us out of this ditch.
And next time, we will knock on the door of death.
Right now we're approaching the door. Next time we're just going to
Next time we're going right up to it.
Yeah.
That was my
I got
ending on
Zach,
that.
that's it.
I got nothing.
Zach, that's clearly the end.
Knocking
That's
on
it.
death's door.
Yeah. Knocking on death's door.
Knocking on heaven's
Next
door?
time. Next time we'll be knocking on death's door.
We knock on death's door. This time, just hairs in places where they're not supposed to be.